Lesson 34 covers factor by grouping. In order to factor by grouping, again, we're dealing with polynomials here. We factored out of trinomials, we factored out of binomials. Now we're going to get into some polynomials. And in order to do this, we're going to need to factor by grouping here, because you can see that not everything has a common factor that I'm able to pull out in example A. I can't pull an A out of every single term, or a B out of every single term. So then you look to factor by grouping. In order to factor by grouping, everything must apply. All of these must apply, these conditions. First, there has to be 4 or more terms. We'll look at A. There's 4 terms. Terms have to have common factors that can be grouped together, meaning you can group things together, and when you group things together, you can factor things out. For instance, I can group this first set together, 6ax plus 3ay, and I can factor something out of that. I can actually factor out a 3a out of this group. Look in the second one. This is a positive, so plus, and then I'm just going to say this is a positive 2bx plus by. Something can get factored out of that group as well, so that checks out. So when I factor out a 3a out of this first group, I get a 2x plus y. I'm going to go ahead and drop down this plus sign. And then in the second group, if you look at the second group, I can factor out a b. When I factor out a b, I wind up with 2x plus y. So far we've covered the first 2 steps. The third and final step says there are 2 common factors that are identical, or they have an additive inverse. Additive inverse we'll get here in the latter problems here. But right now we have 2 identical factors. Here's the identical factors. 2x plus y and 2x plus y. They are identical. So it checks out. All 3 steps apply. The way to write your answer is 3a plus b, we have here. This is what we factored out, is in one group. The second group is your common factors. So the 2x plus y, the 2x plus y will be in the second group. This is factoring by grouping. Now, this is actually really our answer right here. And if you did the distributive property, or I should say, if you FOILed these 2 binomials, you would get the original answer up here above. So if I did my distributive property into each of these, you would find out that you would get what you originally started with in A. So the answer to A is 3ab, or 3a plus b in parentheses multiplied by 2x plus y. Next, moving on into B. B, same thing. Well, looks like we can group the first set, and what I always do here is this really is a negative a, so I say plus, and I turn this into negative a. So we have a plus, and then basically what you're doing is you're adding these 2 together here. They look like they would be adding 2 binomials together. In the first group, we can factor out a b. When I factor out a b, I'm left with a plus 5. Now you look at the second one, and we have negative a minus 5. Well, basically what you need to think to yourself is, how can I get this to be identical? Remember, back in the problem 1, the identical piece was 2x plus y. Well, in order to make this identical, I would have to factor out a negative 1. When I factor out a negative 1, the negative a here is now a positive a, and the minus 5 or negative 5 is now a positive 5. Now I have 2 identical pieces there, so you can see it checks out again. So I'll go ahead and write this as b minus 1 in parentheses, and then my identical a plus 5 in parentheses, and this would be our answer. And again, if you wanted to double check, you could go ahead and FOIL it. But this is how you would factor by grouping. Why don't you go ahead and give C a shot and D a shot here in the skills check. Determine can you group things right away, and yes, I'd be able to group this. Remember, I would want to turn this into a plus a negative 4. So go ahead and we can start grouping here. So basically this is what your problem would be, is 3xy plus 15y plus negative 4x minus 20. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and work through C. Alright, now that we're back in this first set here, you would notice that in the first group we could factor out a 3y, leaving us with x plus 5. The second group, I'd have to factor out a negative 4 in order to get that common identical piece here. Once I did that, I could go ahead and write my two binomials down, and I'd wind up with 3y minus 4 and x plus 5. Over in D here, again, let's go ahead and group things together. Looks like I could group something there and be able to take something out. Remember, I'm going to go ahead and say this is plus, and this is really a negative 2d minus 7. So I just kind of rewrote it actually right here. Go ahead and work through D as well. When we check it out, you're able to factor out a C of the first group, leaving you with 2d plus 7. And in the second group, we'd have to factor out a negative 1 to give us that common identical factor there. So we have C minus 1 and 2d plus 7. These would both be our answers for C and D here. Here's our grouping with the inverse here. You'll see what the inverse does. But basically, I'm going to go ahead and group this first set here again along with the second set. This is already a positive, so it's not like I needed to put my plus and negative because it is a positive 42. So we'll just leave it just like that. In this problem, in the first one, I'm going to go ahead and factor out a 2a. When I factor out 2a, I'm left with b minus 6. In the second group, it looks like I can factor out, I'm going to go ahead and drop that plus sign down. I can factor out a 7, and when I factor out a 7, I wind up with 6 minus b. Here's where our additive inverse comes into play. You'd notice that these two are not identical. We have b minus 6 and 6 minus b. Notice b is positive here, b is negative here. 6 is negative here, 6 is positive here. So in order to do this, we have to do the inverse. And you basically, what happens here is you say 2a, and then we have b minus 6. Now, what I have to do to get this second one identical to the first one is I actually have to factor out a negative. When I factor out a negative 1, I'm going to go ahead and put plus 7 here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor out a negative 1. When I factor out a negative 1, I get negative 6 plus b. Okay, so that's basically what it looks like there. Now, if you think about it and I do my multiplication here, I have 2a and I have b minus 6. Now, I have a positive 7 times a negative 1. So basically what I have is negative 7 on the outside. And in my parentheses, I have negative 6, right, plus b. So I could actually just rewrite this as b, right, positive b minus 6 in parentheses. Now, if you look at it, there's your additive inverse. This negative 1, factoring out the negative 1, gave me the two identical binomials. So I have 2a minus 7 and b minus 6. And that would be my answer there for A, for the additive inverse. Same situation in here with B. Go ahead and group things together here. After my grouping, in the first one, I can see that I can take out an A. When I take out A, I'll be left with 1 minus 2b. In the second group, it looks like I can factor out a 4. So I'd say factor out a 4, and I get 2b, and I would get minus 1, sorry. So the next thing I look for is, are they identical? Well, I have a positive 1 minus 2b and I have a positive 2b minus 1, which is basically telling you that I need to factor out a negative 1 on this second set. So I would say a parenthesis 1 minus 2b parenthesis. I'm going to factor out a negative 1, so now this is no longer really a positive 4, it becomes a negative 4. And in my parenthesis here, I have negative 2b, right? Because this was a positive 2b plus 1. So now I have my answer as A minus 4 and negative 2b plus 1. Notice that these would be identical here. You have a negative 2b, a negative 2b, positive 1, positive 1. So they would be identical. What I'll have you do here is in C is give the additive inverse a shot here in the skills check. So go ahead, pause the video, and work through it. So what we did here is looks like we'll go ahead and group this first set. I'm going to turn this into plus a negative, showing you that it is a negative 36p. Group that together. After I've done that, I basically have 6p minus 4p squared plus negative 36p plus 54. Determine what I can factor out of each group here. I've done so. I notice that these two are not identical, so I need to go ahead and factor out a negative 1. And when I factor out that negative 1 here, excuse me, I didn't factor out a negative 1. The reason why I didn't factor out a negative 1 is because these are actually identical. Look at these. We have a negative 2p, a negative 2p, and we have a positive 3, a positive 3. So those are actually already identical. So I didn't need to factor out a negative 1. So I have 2p plus 18. Go ahead, fill that in. I like my variables going first here, so that's why I put it as negative 2p first, followed by a plus 3 there. This concludes our lesson on lesson 34, factoring by grouping.